And those further back in time seem to be a lot more in tune with the natural flow of things. So perhaps they were more easily connected back to the source itself. So when we start to look back through history, we see a lot of things that are repeating in cycles of time. That's fine. But then you start to see the same thing. There were a lot of people that were looking to divinity. And it seems that when the back's against the wall and people are really scared and things just don't make sense because of what man has created for them, they always turn back to the light to look for answers. So if you survive those events and afterward, would you not tell the next generations or carve it in stone or, leave messages on canyon walls or write myths and stories so they would be passed down through religion? Instead of being a story, you make it the integral part of a society that never disappears ever. So it's always there as the message for the next future, 500 years, 1,000 years away from us.
Another edition of Trad Cat Night special guest exclusive podcast right here on the tradcatnight.org website, folks. I hope you all are having a very wonderful and blessed day. And on today's program, David DuByne from Adapt 2030 is joining the show yet again. And he, of course, is keeping his eyes on the latest in regards to Earth changes. And David and I think this is going to be like our third or fourth show. We are going to be getting through some of the latest. We want to talk the latest with the Earth's magnetic field. We want to talk the latest economically. What are we going to see? Deflation, inflation, hyperinflation, and really so much more. My goodness, we're going to get to a lot here, folks. David, thank you so much for joining the program yet again. Where should we begin? So much, of course, happening since the last time we talked. Increase in volcanic activity, all kinds of insane earthquakes, even a little tsunami that was registered there in Australia that most people missed. I actually missed it until I saw it. I was some weeks ago as a result of that Loyalty Island quake. But there's a lot to keep up with on the Earth changes level. Where would you like to begin today?
Well, with that being said, in Australia, did you notice that New Zealand has implemented a new tourism tax? Yay! With all the things going on, they want to implement a tourism tax to stop global warming when we got all these dozens of volcanoes firing off. Mm-hmm. Cinnabung just put a 40,000-foot eruption into the atmosphere, equatorial eruption. Etna's going crazy. You should see the lava flows off there. I encourage everybody, please go look and see the beauty of Mother Nature in action when we look at this Etna lava flow. It looks like something out of the Land of the Lost with the red oozing out of the cones. We got 3 volcanoes simultaneously erupting down in Guatemala. And the audacity to say that we have something to do with the CO2 being emitted in the atmosphere. It's just comical now, really, that the stretch they're going to continue to try to push us on this Green Deal that's not going to make any difference whatsoever. And we saw the failures already in Texas. And then the twisted media trying to blame natural gas burning power plants for the failures of the windmills. See, we're in such a strange, what is version of reality with the news pushing lies and lies as truth. And where do we stand? I mean, people pushing CO2 taxes, and we're having an enormous amount of eruptions. And even of all this economy ceased, you know how much reduction there was for the COVID, and there was only a 5% reduction in CO2 emissions globally. So that shows you right there that there's definitely a disconnect between what is told to you about human activity and what is happening on the natural front. So this reset is just nothing more than a control mechanism to make sure that food is controlled as we go into lower food production times. And it has been an exciting month. There's been so much heading on there for this. A crazy month of amplification in what we're seeing around us for all these earth changes. And I might say, electromagnetic changes affecting the human psyche.
Also, in regards to space weather here, what's happening the latest with the sun? I know the sun's been doing some weird stuff here as of late. As a matter of fact, I meant to check that out before even coming on to you what the latest was over at spaceweather.com. Solar windstorm buffering Earth's magnetic sphere here today, causing minor G1 geomagnetic storm in Europe. Auroras are being seen, so auroras are picking up all over the place. What else you got on your radar there in regards to space weather?
Yeah, what else are you noticing with the sun right there? A measly 2 sunspots, right? So we're supposed to be coming roaring back into solar maximum with all the experts saying, no, you guys who study in the grand solar minimum are off completely, that the sun cycle is going to be even stronger than solar cycle 24. We are at a pittance of sun activity right now. And then it dropped off a cliff. So if you go to Sislo, Sislo, and you take a look at the different charts, you can either look at the daily sunspot count, the monthly sunspot count, or you can go back for the full duration of time back into the 1700s. And they even have what they call -1, -2, -3. It's sort of reconstruction observations based on manuscripts and other people at the time talking about it. And you can go, I think, a -7 off that into the 1600s. Looking out at the sun, it should have been roaring already back into solar. And since you're there on spaceweather.com, let me direct everybody who's going to listen to this over there. You're going to look on the left side where it says sunspotless days. And the thing you need to notice most is from 2006 to 21. See, 2006 is where it was ramping back up again after solar minimum. And you notice it's 19% of 70 days with no sunspots. And then when you come back in and you get into the minimum, there should be an enormous amount of days with no sunspots as you transit from, when you see a 0%, that means we're at a solar maximum. It's incredibly high activity. So there's no sunspotless days. Every single day had sunspots, meaning there's more activity on the sun. But what I want to bring you to is at 2006, as it slowly, gradually from that last solar maximum leading into minimum, goes 19, 42, 73, 71, drops, and then but look at 2010, there were only 51 days as we're coming out in the last cycle. There were only 51 days for the entire year of no sunspots coming out and leading into the turn on, the kick into the next cycle. But where we sit in 2021, we have 32 days already this year alone with no sunspots. We should be down, according to the experts, be roaring into this new minimum. And that's what they were trying to deflect. Everybody talking about the grand solar minimum and things that were going to affect our agriculture. That, oh no, don't listen to those armchair scientists over there. We're the true experts. We actually have degrees from some prestigious university. You can only listen to us. You don't listen to any independent researchers because they're all wrong. But it really turns out that almost all the independent researchers saying, you know what, this solar cycle is going to be incredibly low, going to be extremely strung out, and it's not going to have very much activity, are now suddenly being proven more correct than the quote unquote experts, because their predictions were that we're going to scream out of this regular 11-year solar minimum and go right back, rocketing even higher than solar cycle 24. And here we sit, decreased activity, the Atlantic overturning oscillations slowing down, the Florida current slowing down. You got all this extra water from the Beaufort Sea, which is, by the way, a natural freshwater deposit in the Arctic. Don't let anybody delude you that it melted and that's why there's fresh water. It's the largest freshwater depository in the Arctic, as always has been. But this year it's spilling out even more fresh water, diluting. So there's a huge pool of warm water that is not sinking into the Atlantic, in the North Atlantic, like it normally does with that overturning oscillation. So expect massive, and I mean massive, amounts of storms this year. And I'll start with the tornado forecast. Distant early warning. Everybody get ready. This season for tornadoes in the United States and Canada, those of you in Europe, the upper level winds shearing with the lower level winds, that's how a lot of stuff spins anyway, regular tornadic season. This year, we're in a significant La Nina, and the last time this happened was 2011, which was the highest amount of recorded tornadoes ever since the 1950s. And we have low solar activity. There's other clouds layering in with the cosmic rays, and it's a whole different set of third mid-level winds that are going to add into the regular high-low winds that are normally spinning that cause the tornadic activity. Now there's going to be another tertiary set of winds. This is unusual, and just expect extremes coming into this. And really, and we saw what happened in Texas. So please, the bare minimum you can do is get water for a week or two. And I was at an estate sale yesterday, and I got a matching set of kerosene burning or oil burning. You can burn anything in it to get yourself some heat. Make sure you get some wicks, because you're going to need light at night, and batteries aren't going to last so long. But, half a gallon of the lamp fuel mixed with olive oil myself is going to last you an enormous amount of time. I guess it's going to last more than weeks if you fill up those lamps, right? And batteries are going to go out pretty quick.
Hmm. No, that's well said. It's one of the questions I had down here, and it looks like you handled it for the most part, was in regards to specifically the spring. I just had Terrell Blackstar on the other day, and he said, buckle up, according to his, prognostication, what he's looking at. But it seems like with all my Earth changes experts, it's like spring, be ready. You know what I mean? There's not one person that's really disagreeing with one, although everyone's sort of coming at it from a different angle. But how close do we get? I mean, we've all seen the movie probably, I think so, The Day After Tomorrow. I mean, do we get dangerously close to something that's shown in that movie?
Not at that rapid speed of onset, but the thing you would start to look for are extreme cooling temperatures in areas that it doesn't normally get that cold. And you have to ask yourself, we've seen a few of these events this year, and not a lot of news media covered the blistering cold that also just raced across Europe. They had
Europe,
the beast from the east that was significantly as cold as the temperatures and anomalies seen in the Midwest and down into Texas and Mexico. But it happened in Europe too. And not that many people talked about it. All-time coldest ever recorded in the UK for the month. And record snowfalls all from Scotland, Wales, all the way down into England, way far south, and then just amazing amounts of the heaviest snowstorms in Greece.
Yeah.
And it just went on and on and on, but we never heard about that in the States. It was the same thing that happened in the United States and Canada, North America, as in Europe. And Asia also had some extreme cold events. I mean, the coldest ever recorded in Korea. Now, that's one of the coldest places in Asia. That peninsula out there, oh my, you don't want to be there in winter unless you like cold. They set new all-time record temperature cold records there as well, and snow records. Nobody talked about that too much. But you start to see now with this overturning oscillation, it mainly affects the northern hemisphere. And I did a whole video on this. I tried to really suss it out and show all these three things happening at the same time. So you're going to be looking for Europe to have cooler temperatures, and if there's anywhere remotely close to where there's going to be a massive storm bigger than Storm Sandy, that'll be around in the ocean this year somewhere in northern part of the U.S. blasting again if this warm water feeds the storm like it did in 2011 and 12.
So where's the place to be in America? Because most of the listening audience is here in America, although we're international here at Track at Night. 90+% are probably here somewhere. Canada, United States. Where is the place to be warmest? The changes are taking place. And any idea?
Your own underground bunker with a magnetic motor to generate heat. That's kind of the safe place, But in reality,
in a van down by the river.
Exactly. Get the banjo.
Get ready. I know in some of your videos here you've been highlighting some prophecies. I know you talk biblical stuff too, but you also throw in some of these other prophecies that are outside of Christian circles too, like the Hopi and some of these other tribes or whatnot. They all seem to kind of be saying the same thing that we're saying. It's like, get prepared, So maybe we could talk a little bit more specifically what you've been handling in some of these videos on the prophetic side of things.
Yeah, and just to drop back a second, what the extreme weather that we normally see over Texas and the Panhandle and the Tornado Alley, quote unquote, that we're used to, that's all going to shift a little bit. I should say a little bit, way more over to the east. So places like in eastern Tennessee that aren't used to seeing tornadoes and heavy weather like this, that's where the center and the periphery edges are going to be. So places like North Georgia, that is a place that is going to see some of the most extremes of the extremes during this time. Like, I've been in Georgia anyway, during some time, but they get a ferocious lightning storms and just the most electrical activity. Scary down there. This is going to be well above that. This is going to be into like, you understand why the ancients feared the skies kind of thing coming up here this spring.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So it's going to be, pushed more eastward than generally the Tornado Alley area. So anywhere from Arkansas over to the east, you're going to get an enormous amount more extreme weather. So again, these are going to be tornadoes, fast moving events, winds, hailstorms, electrical activity, that kind of thing. So it's going to be a terrifying spring for many. But with that said, on the prophetic side of things, I think that regardless of where we all sit in the timeline, we all are connected back to the oneness, God, the source, whatever you like to term it as. There's so many names for divinity and what we consider creation and all time, space, and everything in this dimension as well as other dimensions. And this thing that we know as time that's limitless, it's the consciousness vibration that created all of that. We're all tapped into it regardless of your time. And those further back in time seem to be a lot more in tune with the natural flow of things. So perhaps they were more easily connected back to the source itself. So when we start to look back through history, we see a lot of things that are, well, repeating in cycles of time. That's fine. But then you start to see the same thing. There were a lot of people that were looking to divinity. And it seems that when the back's against the wall and people are really scared and things just don't make sense because of what man has created for them, they always turn back to the light to look for answers. And I don't know whether it's just through history, but we seem to reach these pivot points where there's a lot of information flowing that there's suddenly this, I guess I wouldn't, enlightenment's a proper word to use, but it's kind of overword cliche used. But it's at the point where people have given up everything back to, I submit to everything from the light, and this is the way we move to. Maybe there's no other choice, but there's a significant shift in these junctures in history, and a lot of information flows. So if you survive those events and afterward, would you not tell the next generations or carve it in stone or, you know, leave messages on canyon walls or write myths and stories so they would be passed down through religion? Instead of being a story, you make it the integral part of a society that never disappears ever. So it's always there as the message for the next future, 500 years, 1,000 years away from us.
Pretty much all these crazy changes. I'm like, blue suns, just not being able to see stars, meteorites falling, earth cracks, fissures. Oh, it is going to be a doozy. Third edition of Trad Cat Night special guest exclusive podcast right here on the tradcatnight.org website, folks. I hope you all are having a very wonderful and blessed day. And on today's program, David DuByne from Adapt 2030 is joining the show yet again. And he, of course, is keeping his eyes on the latest in regards to Earth changes. And David and I think this is going to be like our third or fourth show. We are going to be getting through some of the latest. We want to talk the latest with the Earth's magnetic field. David, thank you so much for joining the program yet again. Where should we begin? So much, of course, happening since the last time we talked. Increase in volcanic activity, all kinds of insane earthquakes. But there's a lot to keep up with on the Earth changes level. Now, in regards to, we mentioned the volcanoes there, and they're popping off all over the place. One we failed to mention, tons of earthquakes happening in Iceland. Taro the other day was pointed to, pay attention to the volcanoes out there in the Icelandic area too. So it's all over the place. Now you've got a video here, already got 25,000 views. 750-year eruption cycle. What's that based upon? How'd you come up with a 750-year number? What does that involve? Is that all volcanoes? Is that just certain volcanoes in a certain area? What does this mean?
Well, that was the Kristuvik volcano that you just talked about. So in Iceland, if you go back through history, Katla is another one that erupted in the 1700s that sent sort of a half a year without a summer. So if we look at Iceland, there's an enormous amount of activity from that particular area that has affected our planet's ability to grow agriculture through the last, say, 6,000 years. That has really caused some massive famines through, if you go back. And I'll even stretch and say 8,000 years. But a lot of those have been pinpointed to this area. And, like Terrell was doing, I was just looking to see what kind of volcanic activity was there. And if we get a VEI 6 or 5, I'm going to say, I'll go up and say a VEI 6 out of Iceland. And I say this, and I really mean what I say when I say this. You need to drop whatever you are doing at that point that you hear it on the news. And you need to go to the hardware store and buy as much plastic as you can, plastic sheeting. You want to go get what they call cattle panel. You want to get any kind of wiring so you can make your own greenhouses and have a hoop over it to make your own hoop houses. You're going to buy as much stuff as you can to create a greenhouse, because at that point, that's going to be the only way to protect the food. And at the same time, while you're buying all that, you're going to want to buy an enormous amount of extra stored food, seeds, and just empty your bank account to the last cent to get ready, because once one of these goes off in Iceland, our world is going to be changed forever. The food production will fall out not even the next year, the very next season. So we're going to go into a global famine at that point within just months, not years, because the interconnectivity of the systems, and they're not going to be able to redivert enough food, and people will hoard it anyway. And that's the whole premise of looking into this. And what was so strange about that whole Icelandic eruption is Krýsuvík only erupted back in 1108 and 1340. It's been silent since then, and suddenly it turns back on right now, which was expected with more volcanoes in the grand solar minimum, but we got the magnetic field wandering. But then I started doing more research into this, and the collapse of dynasties and kingdoms across our planet in the northern hemisphere during that 1108 eruption, staggering. And also there's so many books written about this. The moon disappeared for months and months and months and months, and the moon, even at full moon, it just disappeared. That was from the opacity of all the sulfur dioxide in the air that didn't allow that wavelength of light to penetrate for the Earth. So we lost the moon for months. That was that same eruption straight out of Iceland, that same volcano that just woke up after almost 800 years right now.
Wow.
And the collapse of the Toltecs and the collapse of the Song dynasty. And it didn't matter what continent it was. That's the strangest thing. In North America, the collapse, and you can go through and see the central Mississippi peoples all the way over. And it had a significant effect. And it just woke up again. It's kind of scary, to even think about that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because Catholic prophecy indicates that the moon will hardly be able to be seen. The stars will become very dim, very feeblish. And I always kind of wondered how could that occur? I mean, I think what you're talking about with this volcano popping up, I think that very much fits the equation. Now, another area too on the prophecy side of things, I wanted to throw out to you because I know you're a prophecy buff, because you were talking about earth fissures and cracks somewhere on your YouTube. You're putting out so much information. It's hard to keep up with you. It's good on your side there, David. But here's one from Sister Gianna, the Nativities back in the 1700s, and she very much spoke to our times. But she did make mention of all kinds of earth changes, one of which is in regards to these earth cracks. She says this, as well as I see that the earth will be shaken in all different kinds of places by frightful earthquakes, I see the whole mountains cracking and splitting with a terrible din. Only too happy will be one if they can escape with no more than a fright. But no, I see out of the gaping mountains whirlwinds of smoke, fire, sulfur, and tar, which will reduce nearby towns to cinders. And I've always documented this because I've seen on other, earth changes outlets in various places, Latin America. There's one article here from Chimborazo, Ecuador. This was dated, 5+ years or so ago. They have got all kinds of earth cracks and fissures there with the sulfur coming out and whatnot. And they're just kind of looking around like, what's going on here? Well, I could tell you what's going on. You might want to get out of town here soon, but talk to us on that level with the earth cracks and fissures. I know, what is it, Africa is splitting into two. I know running up and down the Mississippi too, there's a pretty big fissure running, and perhaps that ties in with the whole Scalian map eventually, with that just kind of all opening up and turning to water. I don't know. So much happening, too many variables, David. But what do you think with some of the latest you're seeing with the earth cracks?
Yeah, it's like a Rubik's Cube trying to put it all together. It really is, while you're juggling with the blindfold on to figure it all out. So I start back in history, and that's the New Madrid Fault zone you're talking about. And a lot of people who might or might not have heard about this quake, it was the largest in the eastern part of the United States in the last 200 years. That was so strong that it was ringing church bells clear up in Boston. But you're talking about something that was clear down Missouri, way south on the Mississippi River. The most interesting thing was sand volcanoes came out. They deformed about 10 million acres of farmland at that point. Now, this is in the early 1800s, so it's not into these hundreds and hundreds of millions of acres that we have between Canada and the United States now down into Mexico that we farm with. It was just that whole area, which was the main cleared areas to do substantial farming in the 1800s in the United States. They had these sand volcanoes that came out, and it took them decades to flatten it back out again to make some of these farm field areas usable again. The sand volcanoes were also coming out in the forests too. The whole area itself, the mapped area of the sand fissures was 10 million acres. Now that included a lot of farmland, and they even showed new stream beds forming, and some of what you might consider hills in those areas were the areas where they just didn't do anything with the sand volcanoes because it was in a forested area, and now it becomes a hill itself. So some of the images that were coming out, these sand volcanoes are anywhere from 40 to 70 feet tall. It was something very much similar to that. There were earth cracks. Now, when you're talking about an earth crack, that's very different from a full-on volcanic eruption. What you're talking about is more an earth crack where water will ooze out like a mud flood. So a lot of people really into the mud flood research area on how and why buildings are partially buried and have been through antiquity. They go through these cycles of, well, they'll find excavations in buildings and the first floor will be buried in mud. So they just cut doors into the second floor because they couldn't excavate the first floor. This lends a lot of credence to that. During these times, it seems to be about every 400 years or some light versions in the 200-year range. It could be some select locations. But in earnest, about every 400 years, there's some sort of ripping of the crust that oozes out mud, water, sand, and this type of thing. And for those of you who are thinking like, well, how could there be water in the crust? There's 3 times more water in the crust of our planet than all of the oceans, rivers, and lakes on the surface combined. So when you hear about primary water sources and the Nubian Aquifer, that's something like 10,000 cubic kilometers of water over the Arabian Peninsula area, stretching up all the way through North Africa there. Libya tapped that and was doing a lot of agriculture with it. There's an enormous amount of water in the crust. So if the top mile of the crust ripped and water oozed out, can you imagine how much possibility there would be? And that goes into the biblical Noah flood accounts too, where water was shooting up from the earth thousands and thousands of feet, if not even higher. It was in the crust. And I believe that this electromagnetic effect, we're going to be seeing some things that you really can't possibly understand or comprehend in our modern world because it's been so stable for so long, and our history is written about stability, not these earth changes. So when we see these things, it's going to be so far off the ability for people to understand what they're seeing. They're literally going to freeze in their tracks because it's going to make no sense, and it's going to be so far off the charts, it's not even going to be a thing that can be possibly registered as an event of possibility in their minds.
Yeah. Even scientists are stunned by some of the things that we're seeing happening on the Earth changes level. They just kind of step back and they're like, well, I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. That's never a good sign. Now, to circle back to the mental to circle back to the mental effects or mental changes as in relation to comets. This is a question or topic I've been asking Gil and others, and I believe we may have talked about it a little bit, but let's pick back up on this conversation because there's one Catholic prophecy that's always stood out to me. Blessed Kenori, who also spoke about the 3 days of darkness, but just people losing it, man. People on edge. And I'll just read the prophecy and I'll let you pick up to what you were saying in your video from this past month in regards to mental changes on people and just in general with the environment, animals, I mean, at all. She says, the sky took on a morbid blue color. It terrified everyone. A dark wind blew everywhere. An impassioned and mournful shrieking filled the air, hence all those like strange sounds that we're hearing. So like I throw my hands up, I'm like, okay, is this the electromagnetosphere breaking down? Is this like a comet, inbound that our Earth can't handle? I don't know. She says, like a terrible roar of a fierce lion, it resounded over the whole Earth in blood-curdling echoes. Then all men and animals brimmed with terror, and the entire world convulsed, and then everyone pitilessly slaughtered one another. That is not something you want to wake up to and eat while you're eating Cheerios, David. But I can see how it's kind of all coming together. Break that down for us a little bit more, the mental effects and just effects on life itself, animals, human beings.
Yeah, that'd be a complete frequency reset where everything would scatter in the brain and the base frequency would reset to something different. And those that couldn't handle the upgrade in frequency would absolutely go insane. Now, whatever form that takes in mental imagery in their minds, hard to know. But you got to think about the cosmic ray bombardment. There was this article about a cardinal that are usually red, but there was a half male, half female cardinal where it was red and then the regular duller sort of brown colors from the female. It was a perfectly split cardinal. It was half red, half brown. Strange. And we're starting to see a lot of things genetically that are morphing at the moment. Everywhere you look across the blogosphere, there's always like morphed animals that don't make sense kind of things now. And I'm not talking about six toes. I'm really talking about a new species morphing out of something from cosmic ray bombardment. And then, the whole electromagnetic thing, our brains are set for a certain tuning, if you will. And the right and the left half of your brain are also very much like small Earths. They have an electromagnetic center about them as well. So if that were to go off kilter, like the sun stepping down, or Earth would step down, the magnetosphere. But then what's happening electrically in your brains that are also north-south, if you will, it's getting affected. So lack of sleep or sleep problems would probably be one, because your brain wouldn't function to ever be able to step down into an off position like you normally would do when you sleep soundly, because the electromagnetic fields would be interfering or try to reassemble themselves, or it's like trying to play with two magnets and move them in different places all around the magnet. You're going to get different places that snap together and try to keep it stable apart, but it just slipped together again. If the Earth did a great shudder, that might mean it stopped in rotation for a minute and then started re-rotating. Now, at that point, again, the base frequency would have shifted, and people would absolutely lose their minds. They would absolutely lose their minds, because in history, if you go back to China, we're talking about 2300 BC. The Chinese talk about the Earth stopping for 3 whole days and then re-rotating again. So it's been through our recorded history that this event has happened once before. These tidal waves to and fro, this has all been recorded within the last 5,000 years on our planet by so many cultures. Now, this is not the Great Flood. That's something different. But when the Earth's stopping and the sun stands in the same position for 18 hours and it doesn't move.
Yeah, I've got videos on that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So this is a real recording and a real story passed down from whatever culture, society, race of people it is that said, we witnessed this event and this is what we're telling you happened. So that would be a great shaking to and fro that would definitely shudder the entire planet. Imagine if it stops, and the slowdown anyway would freak people out. The blue color is referenced in John Casey's book, Dark Winter. No, sorry, that was the revamp of Cold Sun. If you go to his very, very first publication, Cold Sun, I think he left us a clue there, because on the very front of the book cover, it's in the blue wavelength of the angstroms when you're looking at the sun. Perhaps he's telling us the sun turned yellow into white. Perhaps the next step is going to be blue, which matches up with your prophecies. But he also knew that the step down was going to turn the sun bluish tinge. How would humans react to a blue sun? The color filtration would be different anyway. So in the prophecies, if you hear about things changing color or everything being a different color, like imagine instead of having a white or a yellow light blowing on something, like tungsten bulbs are terrible if you're going to do filming, like all the colors change. That would definitely be referenced as something in a prophecy of a color change across objects and things. The land turn incredibly purple. Well, most times it won't turn a huge indigo color, because it's not normally in our spectrum except a deep sunset. But if you're coming in with like a blue light versus a white light or a yellow light, it's very possible.
I mean, just all these crazy changes. I'm like, blue suns, just not being able to see stars, meteorites falling, earth cracks, fissures. Oh, it is going to be a doozy.